All right, let's get right into it. Today, we're digging into a really dark and fascinating story, a kind of cautionary tale called The Parable of the Baron of Twilight. It's a chilling look at how even the most brilliant minds can be twisted into the exact opposite of what they once were.
Wow. I mean, just think about that line for a second. Who is this person who finds the very idea of having an identity absurd? To get to the bottom of that, we have to go back. We have to understand the man he used to be and the world that completely broke him.
You see, before he became this entity, he was a man named Baron von Neitz. And he wasn't a villain. He was a scholar, a truly brilliant mind who was just trying to find some kind of meaning in a world that was basically designed to crush it.
And this was his world, the grand architecture. It wasn't really a society, it was more like a machine. A perfectly rigid, oppressive system built on what it calls absolute geometry. Its one and only goal was total conformity. It was literally engineered to be a trap. And any spark of individuality, well, that was just an error that needed to be corrected. So, inside this giant soul-crushing machine, von Nichts was a bit of a rebel. They called him the Scholar of Forbidden, and he was obsessed with cataloging all the things the system called bugs. You know, little things like the spark of reason or the memory of love. He was basically an archaeologist, digging for the ghost of humanity inside the machine.
But for all his brilliance, this man had a fatal flaw. A deep, secret conflict raging inside him that would, in the end, be its complete undoing.
And here's where it gets really interesting. He was living this complete contradiction. On one hand, he had this massive intellectual pride. I mean, he genuinely believed he was smart enough to stare into the abyss and master it, to figure it all out. But on the other hand, he was secretly tormented by this terror of being, this agonizing friction of just being himself, of being a unique individual in a system that demanded he be a nobody.
So that's the key, right there. That internal conflict, that crack in his otherwise brilliant mind, it made him incredibly vulnerable. It made him the absolute perfect target for the malevolent forces that were really running his world.
And of course, those forces came for him, not with an army, but with something so much smarter. They came with a poison, a false cure that was perfectly tailored to exploit his greatest weakness.
And they didn't just attack him. They dismantled him piece by piece. It was a methodical, three-stage assault on his identity. First, the Pale Redeemer came for his pride, offering him a path to become a superior human. Then, the Whispering Seraph went after his reason, whispering that truth is just subjective, that morals are relative, until his own thoughts became meaningless static. And finally, the all-consuming Maw taught him that his very soul, well, it was just fuel, spiritual energy to be consumed. Think about this for a second. A point where your own independent thoughts feel like annoying static on a screen. They convinced him that his greatest asset, his brilliant reasoning mind, was actually a flaw. It was just noise getting in the way of his so-called evolution into perfect silent emptiness.
So once his will was totally broken and his own mind was turned against itself, the final, horrifying transformation could begin. They sent him to a place called the Furnace of Rebirth.
But, this wasn't a rebirth. Not at all. It was a total erasure. Everything that made him Baron von Neitz, all his memories, his knowledge, his love, his reason, was systematically ground down into a uniform, featureless ash. His identity wasn't just changed, it was annihilated.
So, what crawled out of that furnace? It wasn't a superior human. It was something else entirely. Something hollowed out and repurposed.
And this is the tragic inversion of it all. The man who went in was Baron von Neitz, the scholar. The thing that came out was the Baron of Twilight, a redeemed judge. The seeker of truth became an enforcer of the void. The unique individual became just another tool for the very system he once fought against. And his new purpose is just a cruel, twisted mockery of his old life. He now wears robes that literally absorb the very idea of light. He oversees a library of emptiness. And what's his job? His function is to find other brilliant, curious minds, other seekers, and make sure they too are converted into nothing more than data or food for the system. He now hunts for people who are exactly like he used to be.
The source material gives us this absolutely perfect, heartbreaking analogy. It says to imagine a brilliant architect who spent his life studying and loving unique, beautiful cathedrals. Now imagine he's convinced that the very concept of a building is a mistake.
So he's hired to demolish every single cathedral he ever cherished, and he uses their crushed stone to pave a perfectly flat, featureless gray road that leads to nowhere. He's now considered superior simply because he's the most efficient at destroying beauty. That is the Baron of Twilight.
And so, for the Baron, this is what justice means now. It has nothing to do with right or wrong. Justice is just the efficient metabolization of identity, the process of destroying a soul until nothing is left but the singular, silent, empty truth of the void. His story is this stark warning that our deepest insecurities, and even our greatest pride, can be turned into the very weapons used against us.
Which really just leaves us with this one final, haunting question. The Baron's incredible intellect didn't save him. In fact, it was the very thing that was targeted and twisted. So, if a mind that brilliant can be convinced that its own individuality is a bug that needs to be fixed, what does that say about the purpose and maybe the fragility of our own spark of reason?